Lesson 31. Mr. Willy Wonka. Mr. Wonka was standing all alone just inside the open gates of the factory. And what an extraordinary little man he was. He had a black top hat on his head. He wore a tailcoat made of a beautiful plum-colored velvet. His trousers were bottle green. His gloves were pearly grey. And in one hand he carried a fine gold-topped walking cane. Covering his chin, there was a small, neat, pointed, black beard goatee. And his eyes were most marvelously bright. They seemed to be sparkling and twinkling at you all the time. The whole face, in fact, was alight with fun and laughter. And oh, how clever he looked! How quick and sharp and full of life! He was like a squirrel in the quickness of his movements, like a quick clever old squirrel from the park. Suddenly, he did a funny little skipping dance in the snow, and he spread his arms wide, and he smiled at the 5 children who were clustered near the gates, and he called out, "Welcome, my little friends. Welcome to the factory." His voice was high and fluty. "Will you come forward one at a time, please?" he called out, "and bring your parents." A large boy stepped up. "I'm Augustus Gloop," he said. "Augustus!" cried Mr. Wonka, seizing his hand and pumping it up and down with terrific force. "My dear boy, how good to see you. Delighted. Charmed. Overjoyed to have you with us. And these are your parents? How nice. Come in. Come in. Step through the gates." Mr. Wonka was clearly just as excited as everybody else. "My name," said the next child to go forward, "is Wauka Salt. My dear Wauka, how do you do? What a pleasure this is. How pretty you look in that lovely mink coat. I'm so glad you could come. Dear me, this is going to be such an exciting day. I do hope you enjoy it. Overjoyed to see you. Yes, the ticket is quite in order. Please go in." The next 2 children, Violet Bregard and Mike TV, came forward to have their tickets examined and then to have their arms practically pumped off their shoulders by the energetic Mr. Wonka. And last of all, a small nervous voice whispered, "Charlie Bucket." "Charlie!" cried Mr. Wonka. "Well, well, well. So there you are. You're the one who found your ticket only yesterday, aren't you?" "Yes, yes. I read all about it in this morning's papers. Just in time, my dear boy. I'm so glad. So happy for you. And this? Your grandfather? Delighted to meet you, sir. Overjoyed. Enraptured. Enchanted. Is everybody in now? 5 children? Yes. Good. Now will you please follow me? Our tour is about to begin. But do keep together. Please don't wander off by yourselves. I shouldn't like to lose any of you. Oh, dear me, no." Charlie glanced back over his shoulder and saw the great iron entrance gates slowly closing behind him. The crowds on the outside were still pushing and shouting. Charlie took a last look at them. Then, as the gates closed with a clang, all sight of the outside world disappeared. "Here we are," cried Mr. Wonka, trotting along in front of the group. "Through this big red door, please. That's right. It's nice and warm inside. I have to keep it warm inside the factory because of the workers. My workers are used to an extremely hot climate. They can't stand the cold. They'd perish if they went outdoors in this weather. They'd freeze to death." "But who are these workers?" asked Augustus Gloop. "All in good time, my dear boy," said Mr. Wonka, smiling at Augustus. "Be patient. You shall see everything as we go along. Are all of you inside? Good. Would you mind closing the door? Thank you." Charlie Bucket found himself standing in a long corridor that stretched away in front of him as far as he could see. The corridor was so wide that a car could easily have been driven along it. The walls were pale pink, the lighting was soft and pleasant. "How lovely and warm," whispered Charlie. "I know. And what a marvelous smell," answered Grandpa Joe, taking a long deep sniff. All the most wonderful smells in the world seemed to be mixed up in the air around them. The smell of roasting coffee and burnt sugar and melting chocolate and mint and violets and crushed hazelnuts and apple blossom on caramel and lemon peel. And far away in the distance, from the heart of the great factory, came a muffled roar of energy as though some monstrous gigantic machine was spinning its wheels at breakneck speed. Adapted from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory by Roald Dahl. A. Match the following words taken from the passage with their meanings. 1. Extraordinary. I. Surprising and strange, not ordinary. 2. Sharp. F. Clever, quick-witted. 3. Terrific. H. Very great, excessive. 4. Nervous. A. Timid, anxious. 5. Enraptured. B. Greatly delighted. 6. Enchanted. D. Charmed. 7. Perish. C. Die. 8. Muffled. J. Not heard clearly, made quieter, with reduced volume. 9. Monstrous. E. Huge, enormous. 10. Breakneck. G. Headlong, at great speed. B. Answer the following questions. 1. What did Mr. Wonka look like? Answer. Mr. Wonka looked very clever, quick and sharp, and full of life. He was quick as a squirrel in his movements. Covering his chin was a small, neat, pointed, black beard, a goatee. His eyes were extraordinarily bright and seemed to sparkle and twinkle all the time. His whole face was alight with fun and laughter. 2. How did Mr. Wonka welcome the children to his factory? Answer. After a sudden and funny little skipping dance in the snow, Mr. Wonka spread his arms wide, smiled at the children who were standing in a group at the gates of the factory, and welcomed them very warmly to his factory. 3. How many children had won tickets to see Mr. Wonka's factory? Name them. Answer. 5 children had won tickets to see Mr. Wonka's factory. They were Augustus Gloop, the Ooper Salt, Violet Bregard, Mike TV, and Charlie Bucket. 4. What did Charlie see when he looked over his shoulder? Answer. When Charlie looked over his shoulder, he saw the great iron entrance gates slowly closing. He saw that there were crowds outside, still pushing and shouting to enter the factory. Then the gates closed with a clang and the outside world was completely shut out. 5. Why was it warm inside the factory? Answer. Mr. Wonka explained that it was warm inside the factory because the workers, working in the factory, were used to an extremely hot climate. They could not stand the cold and would freeze to death if they were exposed to anything as cold as the weather outside. 6. Describe the corridor in which Charlie was standing. Answer. The corridor in which Charlie stood was very long, stretching away as far as he could see. It was so wide that a car could have been easily driven through it. It had pale pink walls, and the lighting inside it was soft and pleasant. 7. What were the different things Grandpa Joe could smell? Answer. Grandpa Joe could smell many things, all mixed up in the air around them, like roasting coffee, burnt sugar, melting chocolate, mint, violets, crushed hazelnuts, apple blossom, caramel, lemon peel, etc. The smell was most marvelous. C. Join each of the following pairs of sentences with the conjunction given in brackets after the second sentence. 1. A. The corridor was very long. B. Charlie could not see where the corridor ended. Because. Answer. Charlie could not see where the corridor ended because it was very long. 2. A. Sumit was a brave boy. B. He did not want to stay in that empty house all alone. Though. Answer. Though Sumit was a brave boy, he did not want to stay in that empty house all alone. 3. A. Emmett learned German. B. He was studying to become an engineer. While. Answer. Emmett learned German while he was studying to become an engineer. D. Fill in the blanks with appropriate prepositions. 1. Though it was a cold day, it was very warm. The factory, for the workers were used an extremely hot climate. Answer. Inside. 2. 2. Mr. Wonka took the visitors a big red door the factory. Answer. Through. Into. 3. The ticket inspector looked their tickets and found them to be order, and so let them in. Answer. At. In. 4. The children stood the gate of the factory and waited Mr. Wonka. Answer. At. 4. 5. The man had a woolen cap